Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this episode we're going to prepare the RP30 for its shakedown. So just in case if you don't know what a shakedown is, it is actually taking the car to a racetrack and then driving on the track as it was a competition. But of course it is not a competition, and you're going to push the car to its limits. You're going to test out the road holding, you're going to test out the engine, the acceleration, the braking, all these things that are so important on the race car. You're going to test and making sure that everything is okay. You might have to do some adjustments. So that is what a shakedown is. It's preparing it, it's testing it, it's kind of a dry run for an actual competition. I've done already quite a bit of work on the RP30. I have repainted most of the panels after I repaired them because a lot of that polyester was cracked or damaged, or the gel coat had some of those spiders on. So I fixed all that, so now the paint is in a pretty good condition. I did not have to repaint everything, but there was a lot of panels that I did have to repaint. So now we're going to prepare it for the track. So first of all, I want to make sure that the structure of the integrity of the structure of the space frame is actually intact, that there are no cracks and things like that. The next thing we're going to do is to make sure that the suspension is okay, that the wishbones, both upper and lower wishbones, are still in a good condition, and that all the rose joints are perfect. We're also going to check the brakes, that means the brake fluid. In fact, we're probably going to change the brake fluid or flush it through, and I don't even know what brake fluid we have in this car. And then we're going to go on and check out the brake pads, and then finally we're going to have a look on the engine, where we're going to change the engine oil out with fresh oil, the oil filter. We change the spark plugs, we clean out the air filter. And then we'll check the gearbox, and by then I think the car should be ready for its test, and then we fire it up. So we're going to start by removing the body panels on the nose, then the top, the sides, and then we have full access to all the components we need to access to make sure that the car is ready for its shakedown. As you probably noticed, many of the panels are not really bolted down. They're held in place with clips and so on. The panels at the inside. And in the back. I'm going to take the side panels off, and then we can see what's behind it, because we need to change the oil on this car. As you can see, this is the space frame of the car, and you want to check in all these different areas that there are no stress cracks. And normally you do this the first time you get a car, because if you don't know the car, you want to make sure everything is okay. But it doesn't hurt after every race or before the next one or the shakedown to check that there are no cracks in the different areas. So check out that these bolts are all solid and locked in place, and in my case they are. I already checked them. So these are the kind of things you really need to check on the space frame, especially where you have the stress points. And really check where the engine and the gearbox come together, but also where both come together on the space frame, because those are typically stress areas where things do break. It's not uncommon to see the engine support here being cracked. So now that we have verified the space frame and its integrity, now it's time to check on the suspension. And the suspension on this race car consists of two wishbones, an upper one and a lower one, and then supported by a coilover right here inside the car. Now this is really good because the coilover is to the center of the car, so we're bringing the point of gravity more to the center. But also it reduces the effect of the wind, so you have less resistance. What is important on the suspension is that you check all the bolts and all the connections, and that all the rose joints are really properly in place and that nothing is loose. So checking all the bolts is kind of important. Both the bolts that are connecting the wishbones to the frame, but also the bolts that are connecting the wishbones to the uprights, as you can see here. Now the upper wishbone is very important because it connects on one side to the coilover, and on the other side it connects to your upright. So in other words, there's a lot of stress going to happen on this wishbone. So this is the one you really need to check, and check all the welds to make sure everything is okay. But connection of the upper wishbone to the upright is right here, and you can see that actually we have it additional secured with a wire. And I think this is something we all should do whenever you start racing, is securing most of those very critical bolts. On the bottom we have the lower wishbone, also attached with a rose joint, and this is a fairly big one, to the upright. And it's important that all these nuts are really tight, so double check them. And once you double check them, it is good practice to use a pen and draw a line. So when you're on the track, all you need to do when you're back in the pit after your trial, see if these lines are still lined up, and if they don't, then you know the bolt has been moved. So this is very easy. Otherwise you have to go around and check it all out with a wrench to see if everything is still connected properly. So next is our steering, and you want to make sure that the steering rod is properly attached to your upright. You can see the bolts right here and the bracket that we have. So all that needs to be firmly in place. And the rose joint should have no play, because you don't want to have play on your steering. And the same thing is true for the other side. So this is the part which is coming out of the steering house and drives the steering rod towards your wheel. And again, there we have a rose joint that should be in a good condition and locked into place. So as we are talking about the steering, here we have the steering house, and the steering house is connected to my steering wheel, which is in the cockpit, through this bar here. And it's important that this bar is really locked in place, and that the U-joint that we have here is really tight, that there is no play on it. Because to be very honest, you don't want to have any play on your steering, because you have to drive very accurate with a race car, and you are always correcting the car on the steering wheel. Furthermore, you want to feel the car, its grip, by feeling it on the steering wheel. And that is why that is so important, that you should have no play on any of these elements. And here we're going to connect the steering wheel, and you want to make sure that the splines are intact and everything is solid. And that your steering wheel itself is also in a good condition, and that it really locks. Because if that is not the case, then you really will be in trouble on the track. These things are very important, and you might think that I'm exaggerating on this, but I am not. So far we have checked the space frame, we have checked the suspension, and we have checked the steering. Now next up is to check the wheel rims and the brakes. As you can see on this car, we are running slicks, and the reason we are running slicks is because this is a Super Formula Ford. If it was a normal Formula Ford, a 1.6, then you were not allowed to run or race with slicks. You can also see that we have an alloy wheel, an aluminum wheel that you can take apart, and that it's locked with a center bolt right here. What you need to make sure of is that the rim is absolutely straight. Now, I had these rims off before, and I have them balanced and checked out in my local tire center. And you probably noticed that I have this little clip here with a flag on. And if the clip is on, then I know that I have actually bolted down these bolts to the proper torque. So let me take this off, and then we unlock it, and then we can take off the wheel. So here it is. So we've got a disc, and then we have a brake caliper. You can see the red braking pads that we have in there, and we'll have a close-up in a few minutes. So we're going to check the brake pads, and we're also going to check that the disc is of a sufficient thickness, and it is in this case, because I can just see there's no edges on them. We're going to check for the disc if there are no cracks in it or any serious damage or grooves, and that seems to be all fine. And of course you want to make sure that the disc is still running straight, right? So that it has no run out, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So you could put up a micrometer if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do this because it looks really good. So let's take out the brake pads and see what state they are in. So let me get the brake pads out. And we have pins that are holding the pads in place. Okay. And here we have the first one and the second one. And as you can see, they are still very thick, so we are good. They are not seized. Now those are racing brake pads. They come in different colors, and the color just identifies the compound that's on the pad itself. So here we have no issue, so we're going to put them right back. Next up is we going to flush the brake fluid. Now the point is, on this car, I don't know what kind of brake fluid I have in it. It could be .4, and I did mark it as .4 because that's what I'm going to put in. But the previous owner might have put in maybe some silicone-based brake fluid. And you shouldn't be mixing glycol-based and silicone-based brake fluids, so that would be bad practice. So therefore, I will have to test it. So I'm going to suck out some of that oil on both of these cylinders, master cylinders, and then check out what the type of braking fluid is. So let's see if we can open this up and take a sample. Now typically people would look on the color, but the color doesn't mean anything, really. So I will be using .4 braking fluid, and both bottles are .4. The one on the left here, this is Castrol Performance .4, and it's great brake fluid, but it has a lower boiling point than the Ferrado Racing Super Formula brake fluid. So in other words, if you brake a lot and you create a lot of heat, this one is going to start to boil sooner than this one. So it all depends a bit of your driving style and how hot your brakes are going to get. So in my case, I like to use racing Ferrado brake fluid for the front brakes because I apply 60% of the braking power to my front wheels in general. And then I use typically this oil right here for my rear brakes. Why? Because this stuff is pretty expensive. So let us take a sample of the brake fluid and see what it is. All right, so I'm going to put a little bit of water in it, and then we see what happens. And you can see immediately it kind of colors. See how this water gets immediately absorbed in the oil? So this to me is an indication that this is .4 oil, and it's not at all oil which is silicone based, or I should say braking fluid. There are several methods that you could use to flush the brakes or to bleed the brakes. One method is a compressed solution. So you have a container with brake fluid inside. The hose here then actually connects to the top of your master brake cylinder reservoir, and then with a special cap you're forcing this brake fluid into the master brake cylinder reservoir, and then you just open up the nipple on the brake caliper, and then the brake fluid will come out, and also the gear. The good thing about this is you don't need to refill always the brake reservoir. You put it all in here. But of course, you can't keep your brake fluid too long in here because they will deteriorate over time, just like any other brake fluid. So this is a great tool if you do it a lot. The other tool that I have here is a vacuum-based one. So this is easy. You just connect it to your air compressor on the side, and then it's working on the Venturi effect. And this little connector here then goes actually to the nipple on your brake caliper. Very handy, very simple. The only problem is you will have to keep filling up the brake fluid reservoir. But this is cheap and works very well. And then the third solution is the two-man solution, whereby somebody sits in the car, he pumps the pedal, and then he pushes it down and holds it down while you're opening up that bleeding nipple on the brake caliper. For that, you have to be with two people. I'm on my own, so in this case, I'm going to use the very simple method and very affordable method, which is the vacuum-based solution. So let's start. So I filled up the brake fluid reservoir, and now we're going to attach the vacuum line to the nipple on the brake caliper. And here is my collector or my vacuum pot. I'm just going to squeeze it so it starts sucking vacuum, and then I'm going to open up the nipple. So we've gone through about 2 full reservoirs, so I think this is good enough. So I'm just going to lock it, and it's finished. So this is our back side, and of course I have also double checked all the rose joints, that everything is properly connected, that the shock absorber is connected, that there are no cracks, and that there is no play on the axles, and of course that the rim did not have any wobbly effect or so. So that is all done exactly the same thing like in the front. But you can see that the back side is slightly different. The shock absorber, or the coilover, is actually not inside the vehicle, it's outside. And I guess they had no other choice because of the gearbox and all the other parts that are at the inside. However, as you noticed, we have no disc brake here. There's no caliper, there's no nothing here on the outside. The rear brakes are just adjacent to the differential, so at the inside of the car, which is really good because that is now bringing more weight to the center of the car, and the whole idea about a race car is to get the point of gravity as low as possible. So that's why you want to bring everything towards the inside as much as possible. So again, we have to check the brakes on this, but as you can see, this disc is looking very clean. But let's check anyhow the brake pads, because we need to do that. And also notice that the drive shaft is in a fairly good state. I double checked all the bolts, that they are really tight on both sides, so you don't want to have no surprises with these. I already removed some of those pins here, the split pins, so we can pull out these brake pads. And if you look at it from a distance, they seem to be all right, but are they? And here they are. That's one of them. And what I see right here, there's a lot of deterioration here. This pad is no longer any good. Let's see the other one. And again, that doesn't look good. You can see that the substrate on this brake pad right in the middle is actually having a hole. So a lot of stuff is gone, most likely because of overheating, I guess, or something else that it could not resist it. It doesn't look good. If I compare this with a new set, here is the new set. Look how the difference on that. It's a major difference, isn't it? So we're going to put in the new pads, but before I do so, I might have to push back a bit the cylinder. So as you can see, you really need to take them out sometimes to check it out and see if they are right or not. You can't always see it by just looking at it. Now, as you have seen, we have brand new brake pads in the back, and of course those will have to be broken in. And the way you do this is by taking the car to a shakedown or a straight stretch, and we go into brake with it about 25 to 30 times with about 50% of the brake pedal. And then we're going to take it back to the pit. We will remove the brake pads, and we should see an equal wear. There should be no glazing on it, and everything should have been smooth on both sides of the 2 rear wheels. And that's why you have little charts like this that are sitting inside the box together with some instructions. I've adjusted the geometry of the car, and I have another video on my channel that explains on how you adjust the camber and the toe in or the toe out and the caster and so on, but also the riding height and the crossweight balance. And you might remember from the video about a month ago that this car was a bit off, 47% from left rear to front right. So I adjusted it, and now I think I forgot to tighten up my coilover, so let's do that. So now it's time for the engine, and for the engine we're going to change the spark plugs. We're also going to change the engine oil and the oil filter, and of course we're going to clean up the air filter, and then we'll double check the oil in the gearbox. Now for the oil in the engine, I'm going to use Ester Core Technology oil from Motul. This is really good oil. It's a bit expensive, but the good thing about this oil is that it does not foam at all. Before I used Castrol, because these are old engines, but after having talking to my friends and colleagues on the track, they really convinced me that running the 300V of Motul is a better choice. So the oil filter is right here, and remember that this car is a dry sump, so we have no oil pan. So let's take it off. I have to admit I loosened it up a little bit beforehand, because sometimes they can be tough to get off, and then you might need a wrench to get them off. So that's the one, and it should be exactly the same filter, an OC11. It says made in China. If I'd have known that, I would have bought another one. I'm going to put some oil on. It's always recommended to put some engine oil on the rubber. You know what is a bit strange on this? Is that if I look on this filter, the new one, and I look on this one, there's, I don't know if you can see it, but there is actually a difference between the two. I think this is going to have more flow, but both are an OC11, same brand. Now this one is made in Germany, and this one is made in China. Weird. Next time I will pay attention to it when I get it in the store. I don't want filters from China. Sorry, guys, for those of you that like China, I don't. Okay. You don't want to over tighten this, because otherwise it's going to be tough to get it out. Anyway, we're going to dry run the engine anyway and see what happens, say if we have any oil leaks. Now for the spark plugs, I'm using NGK plugs, the AP6FS. I labeled my spark plugs. You can see the tie wraps on them. This is number 3. It's always handy. Now on a 4-cylinder, typically that's not much of an issue. But if you run an 8 or a 6 or a 12-cylinder, then things are slightly different. And they all look more or less the same. So not pitch black, just dark gray. That's how I like them. Alright, same thing here. You see how gray that is? That's good. So I've set the gap on all the spark plugs, and the gap that I've set is 0.8 millimeters. Let's cable up the spark plugs. You might remember that I mentioned before that this car is having a dry sump, so it has no oil pan underneath. That means that all the oil is in this reservoir. So oil is being recovered by a scavenger pump which is dipping down in the dry sump. It's been pushed back in this container, and then it's been sucked back out on the bottom, back to the external pump, which is then pushing the oil around. So this is the container that we always need to fill up. So I think it's about 5 liters I'm going to need in this. On top of it we have a spillover to the spillover tank, and this is the Carter or the top valve cover ventilation, which you're going to need. And of course this little breather here allows the engine debris. So I'm going to get the oil out of this, and this is always a bit of an annoyance because there is no plug to let the oil drain out. All right, so this is my big syringe. We use this for AdBlue on cars, and I'm just going to use it to suck out the oil. So I got about 3 liters out of it. So the gearbox is what we call a dog box, so with straight cut gears, and it's a Hewland MK9. So I just removed the plug on the side and I'm just going to check what the level is. Now typically I just feel inside. If I see oil on the top of my finger, then I'm happy. I just think we just have oil. We just reach it, but not a lot. So I'm going to add a little bit to it. And this is typical gearbox oil. So the oil I'm going to use is Castrol Transmax Universal 15W90. I don't need to put a hell of a lot of it in it, because I think maximum is 1 liter in these gearboxes. So let me check. I think this is about right. Maybe a little squirt more, and that should be it. So I think this was not really necessary, but it's always good to check. You might have noticed that this housing is from a Volkswagen Beetle, and it's actually mounted upside down. Very, very common with Formula Ford. So we are finished preparing the race car for its shakedown. This is going to happen on the 20th of August, so you will see a video. We're going to take it to a track in the north of France called La Croix. I already have torqued down the wheels as well. I did put torque on all 4 of the wheels. I also checked the cooling liquid. So now we can give it a try and see if it starts. So I might have to give it a little bit of throttle. So that seems to be all right. Temperature looks good. Oil pressure is all right. All right. I see no leaks, so that is a good sign. And everything sounds good as it's supposed to be, so yeah. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and the next one will be again Old Rusty. And I'll see you on the track very soon.